brought to you by Charity Mobile, the phone company that supports life and family. 5% of your monthly plan price goes to your favorite charity. Buy the way you believe at CharityMobile.com and use promo code TRADITION.
Much of the audience of podcasts, like the one you're watching right now, tends to be a bit older than, say, the equivalent content on the secular side of things with a political bent, if that makes any sense at all. So if I say that we have witnessed over the past several decades as Catholics an increasing level of rather quiet chaos in the church, which sounds like an oxymoron, but it's not, I'm being inclusive in the real sense of the word of the experience that many of you older viewers have had since the 1970s or even earlier than that. For older Catholics, typically of the baby boomer generation, or even of the generation preceding them, the 1960s, the 1970s, the 1980s, and through today, has been a steady stream of chaos and change in the church, be it on issues of doctrine, liturgy, and the sacraments, or the church's posture in the world. We've seen the church go from joining essentially with Ronald Reagan in the 1980s in opposing the errors of Karl Marx and geopolitics to suddenly being very reticent to oppose those same errors just a few decades later. All the while below the surface, and frankly sometimes not even below the surface, those same errors were given an audience by popes, especially by the present one. I could spend a lot of time litigating those decades of chaos, but instead let's talk about the consequences of decades upon decades of moral and doctrinal chaos in the church. Church attendance has been in decline, with people leaving either because they want the church to surrender on the very few things it hasn't surrendered in practice or teaching on yet, or, and this isn't emphasized enough at least for the Americans watching, they leave the church because the church is often indistinguishable from the wicked politicians pushing very obvious moral errors as a moral good. So many leave seeking greener gospel pastures elsewhere, forgetting the most basic but hardest teaching of the Catholic Church. The Catholic Church was founded by Christ on the rock of Peter, and outside of her, there is no salvation. Now, these years of chaos were made possible, at the very least, by Vatican II. When you inaugurate a season of change in the church, what they called a permanent aggiornamento, when you do it rather explicitly like that, bad actors will run with that opportunity. They're just going to do it. And I say, though, at the very least, because frankly, that's the argument from the position that says Vatican II was just badly implemented. The documents of the council, I'll remind people watching this, were drafted by the same men, who then went and implemented them badly, quote unquote, in their own dioceses. So I think it's safe to say that they knew what they were doing, at least in many cases. But to some degree, Vatican II is part of the story of this chaos, and I'm saying all of that as a long-winded introduction for some context. There's a bishop in the Netherlands, Bishop Jan Hendricks of Amsterdam, who's admitting that the errors of the post-conciliar period have led to the collapse of the faith in his country. He said as much in an interview published by Italian Catholic journalist Aldo Maria Valli on his website, and he has some interesting insights and a couple of sparks of hope that I thought would be good to talk about this morning. And the last bit of his long interview that I will give you here is his critique, his warning about the Synod on Synodality and the German Synodal Way, which are two competing ways of accomplishing the same thing, just one is a little faster than the others, and that is, as he'll rightly point out, secularization of the faith. That's a bishop saying that, and he's linking it to Vatican II. So, that's a good sign, I think. Let's start here. He's asked about a startling figure. In recent years, and what looks like since the year 2020, which is frankly shocking, 60% of parish churches in the Netherlands have had to be closed. Now, if you're watching this if you're watching this from the Netherlands, let me know in the comments if that's just something lost in translation, that it's not in the last 3 years that they've lost 60% of their parishes. Please let me know in the comments if that's just a translation issue in that interview, because that's almost unbelievable. Almost. Think about that statistic for a moment. But the bishop is asked about that and the collapse in faith in the Netherlands in general and the attempt at using synodality to fix this. Here's his response, quote, 60% is just a good estimate. The problem is finances and therefore which churches can be maintained. Good accessibility is crucial. It is especially important that young families can meet other young families. If a young family finds itself alone at Sunday Mass every week among people over 80, that is not attractive. Here in the Netherlands, we have to pay for the churches. There is no financial contribution from the government unless the church is a national monument. Then there is a contribution for renovations, but it is only a small help. So if fewer and fewer people are involved in financing, the churches cannot survive. Maintaining a church does not only require money, but also volunteers, and first and foremost, of course, believers. We feel the consequences of secularization, the process that took place after the Second Vatican Council. A whole generation has grown up without any knowledge of the faith. On the other hand, more and more young people are appearing out of nowhere. Often they do not come from Catholic families. They want to be accepted into the Catholic Church because they have been touched by it. This year we have 250 young people who have come to the Catholic faith, and among them there are also former new arrivals to Europe. The trend is increasing. We see, and this must never be forgotten, that it is not we but the Holy Spirit who leads the church, because the church belongs to God. End quote. It's something worth remembering. It's the Holy Spirit that's supposed to guide the church. That, however, does require having bishops who will listen to the Holy Spirit. And one of the things the third person of the Holy Trinity isn't going to do is to advocate for installing any form of relativism as a guiding principle for the faith, because relativism is a denial of the absolute existence of absolute truth. And that's what synodality is. The bishop is explicitly asked about this in the framing of the German and Vatican proposals for synodality and the incorporation of people's lived experiences into the life of faith in the church. Now, it's worth remembering something here. The lived experience thing is a purely secular concept and has been roundly condemned by the church already. Pope St. Pius X condemned this idea in Pascendi Dominici Gregis, his landmark encyclical on the error of the modernists. One of those errors he called vital immanence, which is his idea that more or less real religion can be determined through the internal experiences, the lived experiences, of religious believers who share their personal experiences about God with others. And in that sharing experience, we learn about God and the truth of religion. It's just relativism ramped up to 11. That's all it is. But that is what synodality is trying to impose on the Catholic Church. And the bishop has some thoughts on that, especially when it's being done in the name of the spirit of the times, which is what we're constantly told. Remember, for 60, 70 years now, we've been told the Catholic Church needs to get with the times. And that's what this permanent season of change is that was launched by Pope John the 23rd when he announced Vatican II. That we are opening the windows of the church to the world, let in some fresh air for the church to get with the times. How long is it going to take for the church to get with the times? It's going to take forever because it's an ongoing process, a forever process. The season of change and chaos is not ever meant to end. Here's what the bishop has to say, quote, "Just like back then in the Netherlands, when it was thought that this was the answer to secularization, people felt that they had to become more secularized and give up certain things in their faith if they wanted to keep up with the times. But that was not the right answer. On the contrary, it led to an acceleration of the process of secularization in the church as well. I hope they learned from the experience in the Netherlands. Instead of watering down the faith, it would be important to be honest and say when you no longer fully believe what the Catholic Church teaches. Lumen Gentium teaches us that we must always walk in unity with the centuries-old tradition of the Church. We cannot invent a new faith. What the Church has taught and believed about marriage, for example, is the appropriate context for the activity suitable to the married state. It is not something that can be changed. What we really need is the witness of faith, a life of faith visible outwardly. People need to see how important it is for us, for everyone, to live according to the faith. Now it is a matter of witnessing to the dignity of our Catholic faith, which is more than 2,000 years old. This week we celebrate St. John Eudes, or take St. Louis Marie Grignon de Montfort, Bernardin of Siena, or others. They were popular missionaries who went carrying the fire of the faith. This is what gives a true renewal, obviously, presupposing the grace of God. Faith is something supernatural. We must not forget it." End quote. Yes, he invoked a document from Vatican II, Lumen Gentium, which is actually one of the most controversial documents from Vatican II. But at least he's acknowledging that the council played some role in fostering the chaos that came afterwards, which is a good start. It's a little late, but it's a good start. And we should pray that he continues down that path to understanding that others have walked before him, because we've seen several high-profile bishops admit that there are at least some problems in those documents that need to be worked out by a future pope or council. But he's, in general, not wrong, especially with that last statement. We need faith, not secularization. The faith is supernatural in nature. And if the Germans no longer believe the faith, pushing for a synodal way where the laity govern the parishes themselves, choose who their bishops are going to be, and have real input on doctrine and moral questions on what the church teaches, that's which all flies against the faith. If the Germans don't have the faith anymore, they should let everyone know, and they should take appropriate steps. And I wish we had more of this from good bishops. Bishops who are willing to take those first uncomfortable steps towards acknowledging a broader problem, that there's a systemic problem in the church, and that it might take some radical acknowledgments to fix the problem. His invocation of the saints and the supernatural faith is key there. This is why most of us whose content you watch or listen to or read will tell you to spend more time in adoration, to pray your rosary daily. Taylor Marshall famously tells you you're not on the team if you're not praying your rosary daily. You need to do whatever it takes to foster the faith. If you want to keep the faith in your families, you have a much better chance of that with a family rosary. Teaching your children about the faith. Helping teach your grandchildren about the faith if your kids are adults and have kids of their own and are having a hard time with it. That is how we get through this crisis, is to do everything we can to make sure that there's another generation of Catholics coming behind us, and to support the good bishops when they do speak out. So please say a prayer for this bishop. He's in the Netherlands, but you notice how few of these bishops are willing to say things like this. Let me know what you think of this in the comments, please. Like and subscribe if you haven't. It certainly helps. So to sharing this on social media, that helps too. And as always, pray for the church. I'm Anthony Stine. Ave Maria.